Hello everyone, my name is Nick and welcome if you are new. Today we're going to discuss my top 5 picks for beginner houseplants or houseplants that I think are generally easy. I have grown all of these plants for at least a full growing season, so I feel very confident recommending them to you, whether you are a beginner gardener or a seasoned gardener just looking for something easy and rewarding to grow. While this is a top 5 video, none of these plants are ranked in any particular order. I genuinely think all of these plants are wonderful houseplants to grow. So without further ado, let's get right into my list. I'd like to keep this list a little bit more interesting, so I'm going to leave out plants that you all have heard of, such as snake plants or golden pothos, but I cannot do a beginner houseplant list without telling you guys about the Zizi plant, which is probably the most common plant we're going to talk about on this list today. So the Zizi plant is one of the most incredible beginner houseplants because not only does it require very minimal amounts of light, but it requires very minimal amounts of water as well. So this is the only plant, if someone comes to me in the shop where I work and they say that they are looking for a houseplant that is for a room that has no windows, like a bathroom, or if they have like some kind of apartment where their bedroom doesn't have any windows or something along those lines, or a very, very dark corner, the only plant I really feel comfortable recommending to them wholeheartedly is the Zizi plant. This is really the only plant that could go in like a bathroom without any windows and not only survive, but maybe even grow for you. I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't grow, but it would most certainly at least live. The trick is to not water them very often. So my saying about Zizi plants is, if you water them more than you pay your rent, it's too much. So that kind of sounds a little bit silly, but I wholeheartedly live by that adage of mine. I do not water my Zizi plants until I can really pretty much not remember the last time that I watered them. I can tell that this Zizi plant could probably use a little bit of water because I can see from this new growth right here, if I kind of zoom in a little bit, that it is a little bit wrinkled. So I can tell that I could probably give this plant a little bit of water at this point. That is usually the telltale sign for me. Sometimes the stalks will be a little bit less upright like it is right now, and they'll start to kind of reach out a little bit. However, that is something that this plant will do over time as it grows. So if you do hear about Zizi plants, or if you've heard about them before, you might have heard that they're very slow growers. And while I do agree with the idea that they're slow growers, I don't think they're as slow as everybody says. So all of these little separate areas of plants, for the most part, are their own separate plant. And each of these plants typically puts off one frond a year. As you can see, I have some new fronds coming in, which is these light green leaved ones. And a frond is this stalk that comes up with a bunch of leaves on it, similar to the way that a palm goes if you think about a palm frond. So it's very similar when it comes to Zizi plants. If you're lucky, you might get 2 fronds a year, you might even get 3, but I find for the most part, because my Zizi plants tend to live in darker situations, that I only get 1 frond a year, and each frond that comes up that's new tends to be at least a few inches larger than the last. So there are a few different varieties of Zizi plant on the market. So this one right here is considered a Zamicro. So I might have mentioned that the species, or the genus and species of Zizi plant is Zamioculcas zamiifolia. So that's where this plant gets the name Zizi plant. And this particular variety is a Zamicro. So this is a Zamioculcas zamiifolia Zamicro. So you can see where the name comes from, because this is a smaller statured Zizi plant. I will show you guys a standard Zizi plant, or a standard Zamioculcas zamiifolia that I have growing in my kitchen. This one has larger leaves and kind of feels out the space a little bit more, as it's just a larger plant in general. This is a micro variety, is more so a desktop variety, or somewhere that can stay, or a plant that's going to stay a little bit more compact. These are 2 really, really excellent plants if you have a low light space. I highly recommend them to any beginner gardener, or just any gardener in general, as long as you stick to my adage, don't water them more than you pay your rent. I'm sure if you water them like every 3 weeks or so, if it's in a bright enough situation, that would be okay. But for anybody keeping their Zizi plant in a dark corner, if you're watering it more than you pay your rent, it's too much. The second plant I want to talk about for my top 5 beginner and easy houseplant list has to be this Monstera Deliciosa right here. And just as the Latin name suggests, this thing is an absolute monster because it would be taking over the entire camera frame. if I were to have it anywhere else than tucked in over here. This thing is commonly referred to as a Swiss cheese plant or just a cheese plant. I've heard it called split-leaf philodendron, even though it's not technically a philodendron, or I even hear people just call it a monstera, a plain monstera. However, monstera is a genus of houseplants that is actually, they're quite sought after in the houseplant community, but this one right here, Monstera Deliciosa, is definitely the most common one you would find if you were to walk into a houseplant shop. And what I love about this plant is it is incredibly easy to grow, hence why it is in this video. But it really is just such a joy to grow as well. It does require quite a bit of light if you want to keep up with these large leaves that get a lot of splits. As you can see, they even get some holes in the center of the leaves, as you can see from this leaf right here, kind of hiding behind this one. But if you don't have enough light, you can still grow this plant. I will just let you know right now that the leaves are not going to get as big. The holes aren't going to be as prevalent in the leaves. They're just going to be maybe just a few holes in the leaves once the plant gets more mature. However, I'll say that the plants get more character, in my opinion. I do have one Monstera Deliciosa in my home that I kind of have a little bit more tucked back in a corner. And as you can see, it's a little bit more funky. It doesn't look as true as a Monstera as you would see if you were to Google search Monstera Deliciosa, but it still has a lot of character and I love it. However, this one right here is one that I grow in a much higher light condition, and the leaves are just absolutely massive, and like I said, it lives up to its name. I water my Monstera Deliciosa about every 10 to 14 days. However, I give it a really good saturation when I water it. So this plant loves to get really wet, while some other plants I might not give like a total saturation of the pot. This one definitely is one that's really easy to just kind of throw in the shower and then just maybe turn the shower on like lukewarm or like cool water. You don't want to use cold or hot, but this plant is definitely a very easy one to care for in that aspect. I think it kind of goes without saying, but if you're going to get a Monstera Deliciosa, make sure you have enough room for it, because whether you purchase it in a small 4-inch pot or a large 10-inch pot already mature, this thing is going to get huge and you're going to have it for a really long time because they are ridiculously easy to care for. Like I said, I water it roughly around every 2 weeks. I just give it a really good saturation, and I give it a lot of light if I want these leaves to get really big. So definitely a really easy plant to care for. It is a very popular houseplant, but it definitely lives up to that hype. It is really a wonderful and rewarding houseplant to grow. My third pick for this list looks very similar to the last plant I just showed you guys. However, it is a different plant altogether. So this is a Rhaphidophora tetrasperma. And the reason why I want to show you guys this plant today, or at least talk about this plant today, is because it is a very popular or very hot plant right now. And it does seem to cost a lot of money, at least when I see it on the internet. It's definitely not cheap. However, I do want to happily let you guys know that if you've been wanting this plant or you've been kind of nervous about spending a lot of money on this plant, it is incredibly easy to grow. This plant grows like a freaking weed for me. You can kind of see behind me over here, I have a pot of it back here, and it is growing all over the place. I have this one vine that is just growing all up. It's always been hanging out in the back of my videos, at least in recent times, and it's growing all up the wall. So it really it grows absolutely rampant. This is a cutting that I took off this plant over here, and the plant regrows so fast. I cannot tell you how many times I have cut my Rhaphidophora. It is just such a wonderful and rewarding plant to grow. I absolutely love it. I can tell you that it needs a good amount of light, however, it doesn't want any direct sunlight. So it's truly an understory plant in the rainforest where it grows. So this plant really doesn't want to be hit with any direct sun rays. This plant would probably burn or get very chlorotic looking if you gave it too much light. I find that my Monstera Deliciosa can take a little bit more light than the Rhaphidophora can take. However, this plant is very easy to grow, hence once again why it's on this list. So if you were kind of nervous about putting out the money for this plant, or if you did get a hold of this plant, rest assured this is a very easy and rewarding plant to grow, and I highly recommend adding this one to your collection because it just really gives me that jungle vibe in my home that I'm always striving for. My fourth pick is definitely a plant I talk about a lot on here, so if you watch my channel, I apologize for talking about this plant so much, but this is a Scindapsus pictus, and it is wholeheartedly one of the easiest plants that I grow and one of the fastest plants that I grow, which is why it has to be on this list. They commonly call this plant a silver-spotted philodendron or silver-spotted pothos, I hear. However, it is neither a pothos or a philodendron, it is a Scindapsus. However, I cannot blame anybody for calling it a pothos or a philodendron because it looks very similar in the nature of its growth habits. What I love about this plant is it speaks to you. It really tells you what you need to know. I never water this plant until the leaves start to kind of curl in. So they will truly, you'll find a bunch of the leaves like curled in like this. It's probably, if I had to give you a time frame, it's roughly, I mean, I can't even tell you exactly. It's probably like every like 7 to 14 days, like every 1 week to 2 weeks. It's definitely not more than once a week that I'm watering this plant. And that being said, it will tell you if you're overwatering it by having some of its lower leaves turn yellow and fall off. So since this plant has such a wonderful language, I think it is such a wonderful plant to grow as a beginner, because it's definitely a very wonderful way to kind of learn how to speak plant, if you will. It really does tell you everything you need to know. It does probably require a little bit of light. It's definitely not nearly as low light as the Zizi plant. I think the Zizi plant is really the only true low light plant that I have on this list today. However, I do grow this one about 6, maybe 7 feet away from a pretty bright window that has a lot of plants in it, so it's probably not as bright as I think it is. So this one is not getting a humongous amount of light whatsoever, and it seems to be growing pretty well for me, as you can see. And the wonderful thing about Scindapsus is there are quite a few varieties of Scindapsus pictus. So I've definitely talked about this one before. This is Scindapsus pictus argyrius. This is probably the most common one you would find if you walked into a garden center. But there's also a very similar one to this called Scindapsus pictus silver Ann, which has a bunch more silver over the leaves. I have one growing around a window in my home. And then I also have, pardon me as I reach and grab it, this Scindapsus pictus exotica right here, which has these wonderful large leaves, as you can see. Really stunning plant, very captivating. I love the blue, gray, green color to the leaves, and they are kind of shimmery. I don't know if it's going to show off, but they are a little bit shimmery when you get them in the right light. This one right here, the Scindapsus pictus exotica, I find is a lot more slower growing compared to the argyrius and the silver Ann, which are the first two varieties I showed you. So definitely just as easy, has the same exact language as the regular one that I showed you, with the whole like curling in the leaves and whatnot. However, this one does grow a little bit slower, so I think I would recommend the argyrius and the silver Ann a little bit over the exotica in terms of a beginner or easy plant, just because it's a little bit more rewarding to grow because they grow so much faster. I'd say the Scindapsus pictus, if it's having a good year, can really grow up to 10 feet if not more. Okay, so my last pick for my top 5 beginner or easy houseplants has to be this Peperomia Tetragon right here, which is one of my favorite houseplants. It's a very common peperomia, at least where I live, and it grows very, very fast. So this one right here, I think I've only actually had for about maybe like 8 months at this point. So I haven't had this one for a full year. However, I have other ones in my home that I have had for over a full growing season, and I just love the way they grow. So when you typically find the Peperomia tetragonas, they're usually pretty small and they're only like a few stems coming up out of the soil. But once you have them for a few months and they get a little too tall, they start to trail over and just really fill out their space quite wonderfully. So just like all the ones I typically see, I bought this Peperomia tetragona in a little square 3-inch pot. I potted it up and I've grown it for almost a year now, as I said, and it has just flourished. The trick with this plant is to give it a lot of light, maybe not scorching sunlight like you would give a succulent. I do have this one in a south-facing window, however, it's kind of in a situation where it's not getting as much light as some of the other plants in the south-facing window, which, for the record, south-facing windows are the windows that receive the brightest light, north-facing being the least amount of light, east and west kind of being on par. So this plant is in a south-facing window, and I only water this plant when the leaves tell me when they need water. So I know that sounds kind of ridiculous, but I will explain what I mean. If you have watched some of my videos before, you might have heard me talk about the taco test, or we can also call it the pinch test. So I take a nice developed leaf. I like to avoid the leaves that are still developing because they're a little bit more flimsy to begin with. But I go to a nice developed leaf and I try to squeeze it like I'm squeezing it up like a taco shell, and typically they don't budge. This one is not budging at all, so I know I do not need to water this plant. However, when the leaves do easily fold in, or basically if you could just in general fold the leaf and it would not break, this plant is telling me that it needs water. That is how I care for pretty much all of my peperomias. Peperomia tetragona really is the most low maintenance peperomia for me to care for because I can really forget about it. As long as you have enough light and you have it in a bright windowsill, you can really just forget about this plant and just reap the rewards of watching it grow, because it was not nearly this full when I purchased it about 8 months ago. So really, really rewarding plant to grow. Thank you all so much for joining me for today's video. Just to recap, my top 5 list for beginner and easy houseplants is Zizi Plant or Zamioculcas zamiifolia, Monstera Deliciosa, Rhaphidophora tetrasperma, Scindapsus pictus, and Peperomia Tetragon. All of these plants are incredibly easy plants to grow. I have grown them all for at least a full year, if not way longer, and I find that all of them are just incredibly rewarding, if not some of the easiest houseplants I have ever grown. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at phillyfoliage, and I will catch you guys in my next video. Have a great day!